slide for me, please. So today's webinar is being held by the 3 Centres for Excellence. That's Derby College, Norwich and Western. Each of those centres have got a different focus, and the work of the centres is being funded by the Education Training Foundation. The speakers will introduce themselves throughout the presentation. There's a number of different speakers, and Elaine is hosting the webinar, thank you Elaine, and recording it. And we will monitor the questions throughout. The slides from today will be available and sent out to you, and a recording of the webinar will be hosted on the Education Training Foundation website so that you can go back and review it and see it later on. Please use the chat function, but if you have any specific questions, please feel free to get in contact with us after the webinar if there's anything in particular that you want us to provide further details on. A number of you pre-submitted questions. We hope that the content today will answer those for you, but again, if it doesn't and you want some further information, please get in contact. And any responses from today, we will write up the questions and produce a briefing paper in response to questions. But also, if there's any particular topics that we feel that there's a real interest in, we can arrange follow-up sessions, breakout sessions and further webinars. So again, we're open to suggestions in terms of the content you hear today and any further content that you would like to hear from us. Next slide, please. So the Education Training Foundation is a national workforce development body for the further education and training sector, which is supported by the Department for Education. There's a number of resources available to you, and we've put some key links there for you to review after the webinar today. But it's about sharing best practice, and that's a two-way conversation. So obviously we're doing a lot of things that you might be interested in, but also we'd like to hear from you about best practice as well. A key theme for 2001-2002 is employability. So as well as those 3 themes you can see there, Western College is leading on people, Derby on curriculum and Norwich on community. Employability will be a key theme for each of the 3 centres in the next year coming. So if you could move on to the next slide, please, Elaine. Thank you. Here's what we're intending to cover today. Apart from the virtual on-site transition programmes, it's quite a chunky sort of topic, and we felt that that probably needed its own webinar. So we'll be putting that together jointly and sending further details out on that. But everything else that you can see on the screen there we'll be covering today. I also, I'd like to hand over to Sarah now, and she will take you through to the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Afternoon, everybody. We lead on curriculum, and so the stuff that we're planning to cover today, and we'll try and cover it quite swiftly if we can, is really the reflection on how ready were we for the radical and momentous shift I think that the whole of the post-16 sector has made, well, education generally. Some of the specific things we've done around supporting our students with inclusion needs that most people call SEND, particularly those who are in our discrete curriculum and those with significant levels of anxiety across our college, how we've worked with the young people who are studying on RAPA-based programmes and quite radically changing their targets, talking about how we've moved to virtual EHCP reviews and also virtual support planning and how we're changing that for the future, and then to talk through really what our happy accidents are. I would start by saying that one of the main themes for us has been the underlying but transparent intent for the whole organisation, that actually we've adopted a very deliberate caring for staff approach. The premise being that if we're caring for staff in every element of their shift to online provision, we will inadvertently then end up caring for our students as well. And I think that For some staff, it's been a radical, you know, some of my inclusion team have progressed with 10 years worth of IT updates in the last 6 weeks. It's been a very interesting time. Can you whip to the next slide for me? So I think Ben, who's one of my team, is going to start to cover some of the specifics around what we've done for different areas of the college. So Ben, if I can hand over to you.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Ben Walker-Dine. I'm the digital lead for inclusion at Derby College. So what we've done over the past, since we've been distance teaching, distance learning, remote working, we've started by delivering in that like a traditional teaching approach, but quickly learned that we're going to have to change that quite a bit. So what we've done is we started to introduce shorter sessions, so not a regular teaching session was an hour and a half, and that we realized, like I said, quite quickly that was far too long. So we shortened it down to a 15-minute introduction, and then we ask students to go off and collaborate between themselves, whether it be in pairs or small groups, and then come back and either give feedback to the session or submit the work once the lesson had finished. Another thing that we've learned is to cut down the number of students within a taught session. So again, along with the time, we're trying to do distance learning for like 20-25 students. And that didn't quite work very well for us. So we then and that was from a number of different ways. So it was the students were getting used to the distance learning, and they might have been quite shy and not engage as fully as maybe we would like them to. So what we did, and then obviously that for the staff as well, managing the size of that class and maybe the behaviours around that. So we cut that back to 5, 6 in a class, and then once students began to understand the whole remote learning, we're now just slowly increasing their numbers to get a bit more of a collaboration within those sessions. We've had quite good engagement in online and remote learning. From cross college, we've got about 5,000 students, and about 80+% of those students are engaging, and then those with an inclusion need or SEND are engaging at about 95%. And then those that aren't engaging online, we're using a good old-fashioned post and sending booklets, worksheets, instructions, tasks through the post, which we have been getting back as well. So that's great. Just with those stats, the hardest to reach students are level 1. And we kind of think that might be because maybe exams have been cancelled for this year, but looking forward, we're looking at maybe for those students returning on our A-level programs, doing some face-to-face teaching at the back end of the year. So they've got that rollover into the second year. So that's quite promising and what we want to do. With those changes within the timetable, we've had to change the way we deliver our support. So because the groups are smaller, they've kind of had to change timetables. So from an inclusion team and perspective, we've changed that support. So we've rearranged staff and moved staff so we can support the students that need that within day-to-day process. And I think the feedback we've had from our supported students are that they like the regular check-in opportunities. So start of the day, if certain staff meet them in the class, virtual class, and then throughout the day as well. So students are, as much as we want to push that independence, but at this tricky time, I suppose, they do have that support. We've also tried to personalize the way students access from a virtual environment. So we use Teams, and I know Andy's going to talk about that a bit later, which is great. But we also offer Moodle hand-ins as well, because if work needs to be assessed, we've got a turn it in option within our Moodle team. So that's great. From a practical point of view, we've asked students if they can work with people at home. to maybe film themselves. So an example I can give, catering, so how they lay out a particular table or how they're preparing a meal. Hair and beauty, I know some students have taken like mannequins home and they've been practicing manicures on themselves. I would want to get a bit of a giggle out of everyone and say they're pets as well. So I've seen some excellent pictures of dogs with painted nails and things, so that's good. And just finally, before I pass back to Sarah, I think the IT department, and I'm sure lots of colleges across the country have given the opportunity or handing out IT to both staff and students, those who might be looked after, those with an inclusion need. I can only talk for Derby College, obviously, and I think Sarah will back me up in they've done a smashing job making sure everyone's got IT. And also we have bought some 4G dongles for those students who haven't got internet access at home at all. So that's been provided as well. So yeah, I think so they're the kind of things we've introduced at the college. So if we can pass back to Sarah for anything that I might have missed.
Thanks, Ben. Do you want to just go to the next slide for me, Elaine? Thanks ever so much. So I think to recap, Ben explained that we've got good engagement so far and we're monitoring that quite closely. I think the one reflection for me is that we anticipated, or the government anticipated, that we would all, as post-16 providers, see about 20% of our students remaining as attending colleges on site. In Derbyshire, that's as low as 6% of our cohort are still coming in. And as you won't be surprised that, well, we've remained open throughout, but we've had a core group of students who have come in, and they were the ones who were particularly struggling to engage with more online delivery, and also have had some compromise around their mental health. And so we've seen quite a few young people return in the last couple of weeks from our cross-college provision who are in or were in crisis. And really positively for me, we were able to implement very swiftly an emergency risk assessment process, and those young people have been re-engaged. And the feedback from them and parents, carers and professionals supporting them is actually that reintroduction to that element of normality and having a structure to their week, which involves them leaving home and coming onto site, has actually stopped that decline in their mental health. So that's a massive positive for me. The other thing for us is that we had to acknowledge that we've got a big team at Derby and we support lots of students. And within that team, there's a huge variation in staff's ability as far as confidence, as far as the IT equipment they've got, as far as a safe place to work at home is concerned. And we're still not at the point where I'm very confident that we've got consistent provision across all of those staff. But what we have been able to do is do immediate and personalised support for those staff and actually take them through quite structured tutorials using Microsoft Teams and showing them and reinforcing how to use that method safely to make sure they're safeguarded and our students are safeguarded. All leaders and all managers are focused on supporting teams and the team support. And I think the positives have been that we've actually been able to, for some of our more intensely supported students, we've actually been able to reduce the support that they've needed at this time because we've alleviated lots of their neurodiversity and lots of the panic that was ensued as a result of travelling to college. My biggest reflection is that students are consistent. Those students and families that have engaged easily or been supportive in their regular study remain consistent, and they're still relatively easy to engage in contact. And those students who are more challenging, we have to be more creative in our approach, remain more challenging, and we therefore still have to be more creative. We're doing our first series of knock-ons next week, where we've actually got staff going out and knocking on students' doors, and that's because we have got some serious concerns about safety and their ability to engage. I think with most things, we are, as an industry, we're quite good at reflection, and we're quite highly critical in our reflection, and we look quite systematically at what we can do better or what we can do differently. And the thing that for me is the real point of celebration is, one, I've got immense pride in our teams and the great work they've done. Two, I've got immense pride in some of the the really informal developments that students have made. So students who are elective communicators when they're in college have used their own mobile phones to phone each other and to maintain peer friendships and peer relationships. That's a real anomaly because they choose not to talk to each other in college, and yet they can now speak to each other by phone. We've had a couple of students who've completed study programs and left early because they've gone into work. So the big piece of work we've done at the start of the year around creating those work placements for students who've got those inclusion needs, almost like a year-long job interview, have resulted in them contacting the college and apologising to us because the co-op have offered them a full-time job. And so they want to go and work at the co-op because that makes them a key worker and they're making a positive contribution. So it's magic. And I think the other thing is that we have found that we are not only supporting our young people and our staff, but we have inadvertently started to support parents and carers too. So those regular contacts with people who have got nobody else to contact in the week is actually having a positive impact on parents and carers. Quite a few of whom have already started to ask us if we'll be maintaining this level of contact and support for a longer period of time, because it's actually helping them manage their own mental well-being and health in order to support their family. So for us, that's been a real positive and a real happy accident that I think is worth celebrating, and that will be working across our whole sector. So it's absolutely delightful. So that's it from Derby and our curriculum, other than to say we'll cover at the end the other things that we've got planned that will meet the needs of some of what you as providers have already asked us to kind of generate. So over to you, Jane.
So actually, I'd like to introduce my colleague Andy, who will take us through the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Hi there, my name's Andy Girling and I'm the subject area manager for the curriculum areas surrounding learners with profound complex learning difficulties and severe learning difficulties. And I'm going to talk to you today about our constant ongoing journey in developing remote virtual curriculum from the usual ways of working at the college site. Next slide, please. So it's initially sort of, well, it has become four main areas that have developed proportionately with each area sort of increasing the amount they're being used over the last 6-7 weeks. So we have been using Microsoft OneNote as a learning platform. Learners at college have been using this in our curriculum areas within their sessions, and tutors have been quite often using this to track photo evidence and to be able to use it as a way of communicating with home and having interactions with home learning as well, that we have been doing to some extent before. We also use the physical resources that we sent out to individual learners' homes, and we're able to sort of individualize those in terms of their learning outcomes and learning intents and rationale for their purpose of curriculum areas. And then more recently, I've now moved on to more live sessions using Microsoft Teams, endorsing the one-to-one tutorial model, and having specialist support as well, working with learners, including mental health support and speech and language and communication support. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we created a home learning platform initially, which was through OneNote, where it was populated with various resources, activities that relate to the learning intents, EHCP outcomes and pathways that we deliver on our course. And staff were able to individualize these and differentiate them according to learners' preferred ways of working or learners' needs. Next slide, please. So like I said, we're able from these to create lots of tailored learning activities to the learners. And we've got some examples here, some money activities, some health and wellbeing fitness activities. And tutors were able to develop structured timetables by populating learners' individual areas within the OneNote of the activities that they need to do. Other aspects of the program is that has quite inclusive tools such as immersive reader, and we were able to embed lots of audio instructions and video instructions, which could support the understanding of learners being able to engage in these. But what we did find is initially what we set up was quite an individual learning experience where learners had work to do. However, it wasn't necessarily collaborative or working together, which is paramount for the development of communication skills and the rationale while they're on our courses. And also it was the advantage of using OneNote. It was able to give lots of feedback and ongoing feedback by seeing the learners work, being able to give some audio feedback on it so that they can move forward with their learning. Next slide, please. So other examples is that the work that we sent home, which works really well with a lot of our learners in our sensory learning curriculum. We were able to send this home, work with the families and parents and carers, circles of support, which might include supported living support workers. And the work that we were then sent home were able to be uploaded to the OneNote platform, which we could then give some feedback, we could interact with the learner and sort of move the learning forward from their intentions. Also, learners were able to put photos up and videos, and it was a good way to sort of keep a record of their progression, what they've been doing. Next slide, please. So like I said, it started out in the first week or so as being quite individual learning experience rather than groups. So we then started looking at collaborating more. An activity I did with my group is we ended up doing a bit of a cooking session where learners had to cook a variety of different things using the differentiated recipes and video instructions that we uploaded, and that learners it was a great experience for learners because they were able to consolidate the learning that they would do in the college classrooms, but into their own home, which is contextually relevant to their own progression, which of course, while in the college building can be quite a challenging thing to do and is a very meaningful learning experience. But that we found was quite an advantage of having this home learning experience for the learners, being able to do that in their own settings. Other things included keeping like logs of what they've been doing at home and sharing ways of managing and structuring their time now in this new environment and new society. Next slide, please. So that sort of then led on to, after a week or two of doing this, to really working as a team to think actually we really need to start move this forward more and start to do some more live sessions. And essentially we created a live session timetable, which was facilitated by the personal tutors of the learners. As they know the learners the best, would be able to tailor resources and be able to tailor means of communication and interaction through the teams more effectively, and also knew the learners' parents and circles of support to support those learners to be able to interact with this. It was quite a lot of work in the first instance to set this up because we haven't used Microsoft Teams with our learners before until this point. So we had to send out lots of video resources that we emailed to parents, and we had to support the young people and their parents quite a lot to facilitate the launch of this new sort of way of working. Next slide, please. So from this, we very quickly learned that the usual ways of planning for teaching and learning and facilitating a learning experience was very different online. Things such as being able to do longer sessions had to become a lot shorter, about 45 minutes. And we needed to obviously keep the structured times and consistency to alleviate any anxieties that this new way of working might form for learners. Also, we wanted to maintain our individualized and differentiated approach that we would do in the college building. So that included maybe having different learning intent for different learners, ensuring resources and documentation was sent out, used on the platform that accommodated all learning needs, and also thought about how learners could interact, whether it was using a video, whether it was the conversation chat, and whether it was just communicating verbally through audio. This involved an awful lot of work with families and circles of support to enable participation into this. And again, for the lecturers and practitioners facilitating this learning, a lot about with thinking outside the box thinking to think about how we can engage learners and maximize learning and engagement through using the resources that they would have at hand in their house. So we sort of came up with this blended learning sort of cycle that the team sort of decided this seems to be quite a practical way of structuring lessons, where the learners really engage well with having time to communicate and see each other. To start with, was a real incentive for learners to interact and come together on this platform. It was a time that we could play games, which I'll go for a couple that we started doing through Teams. Then the next part was looking at the learning intent and topic of that session delivery, maybe doing a few activities and questioning through the conversations to sort of assess how what learners know already and how to move them forward like we would in the classroom. From that, we would then set work and activities that learners would then go off to do and then come back and see us again later. But in the background, there would be support through conversations with the tutor. And some learners that would normally have a more individualized and more intensive support at college would then be able to drop into one-to-one sessions with support workers that then use this alongside the lecturers to have that support to be able to complete the activities in the learning set. Next slide, please. So here's an example of one, this a development of English and math skills associated with a group of learners from E1 to E3. And what they did is they did a plant survey in their gardens or while they're out on their one form of exercise at that time in the community. And they were able to use this app to identify the different plants, run a survey on them, which incorporated lots of different math skills, sort of counting, addition, subtraction. And then the English side of it was to sort of to research one of the plants and to formulate sort of a sentence or some imagery that they could then share with their class peers in the next session to see what's in their own gardens and areas. Next slide, please. Other sessions were done are communication activities. So an activity I quite often start with my sessions is we turn the cameras off and then play guess the object, where learners would have to go around the house, find an object and use description or language to explain. Other activities have been doing a presentation, again looking at those English functional skills that learners will be working towards, but doing a presentation about the NHS, which was very society relevant at the moment. As a college, the sport department has been doing a lot of embedding of emotional health and well-being, and have started doing that with our learners. So we've got drop-in sessions twice a week to do health and fitness classes in the afternoon, which has had a very high intake from our classes. I've then been working with families as well to do some life skill and practical activities, such as developing family food boards each week and coming up with shopping lists. Next slide, please. So some of the sort of the challenges that we faced doing this, and a lot of this was around the launch of being able to use Teams in the first instance. So we had to ascertain who had technology at home, and we did this by sort of doing a survey with all the families and young people. The vast majority did, fortunately, have technology, but there were some that didn't, in which we've now been able to access bursaries and grants to support those learners to send out technology. A lot of the work came with those families and circles of support to ensure that the learners can access those platforms meaningfully and be empowered to do that more independently over time. And that included sending out audio, videos, sending out lots of instructions, maybe having one-to-one sessions with learners before the main launch of their live sessions to alleviate any anxieties, to build those skills up before that they then join and participate in learning with others. And the Library Plus team at the college have been amazing, and some of the parents and carers that we found didn't have a massive amount of technology skills to be able to support their young people, so that the technology team worked with the parents and carers to upskill them, so in turn that they could support their young people to access and learn through this new platform. And again, it's maintaining constant and regular contact with the families to ensure what we're doing isn't causing any anxieties, that it is a positive and meaningful and a happy learning experience for those involved. And then looking at maximising the engagement, it was obviously really thinking about maintaining interest and coming up with lots of different creative ideas that learners can participate at the time in just their house and in their garden areas. We found that a lot of incentive initially, like I said, was learners being able to see each other and being able to interact with each other basically formed a lot of participation, because learners were feeling quite isolated and really wanted to feel again like they were back at college. So once we managed to get that participation, which is reaching around 90% now, that we didn't want to stop over Easter, so we kept a light touch provision with just a few sessions running and timetable sent out to learners, but also looking at doing this in the May half term as well to encourage the engagement. We use it for one-to-one tutorials, which can support the emotional health and well-being of the learners. And support workers are able to drop into learners to make sure that they're okay with the activities that have been set and to provide any support. And like I said, it's that opportunity that we found for learners to be able to really communicate, which is a lot of the outcomes and intentions of our learning courses, and to work on those has been a real sort of incentive for a lot of learners engaging with it. Thank you very much.
So that was a brilliant section. Thank you, everyone. And we have quite a few comments in the chat, which has been really useful. One of the points earlier on, I think it's moved up the screen, but I think it'd be quite helpful, Ben, if you're able to answer about dongles. Are they safe to be able to send those at home for young people to use? I suppose it's about just when we're thinking about safety online. If you're able to add a comment about that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as like the computers that students have access to and are able to use at home, we have put our own system onto that computer. So the college is able to pick up on it and block any websites that shouldn't really be accessed. And if in the background, what I've done is I've tried to chat with our IT team just to see if what has been put in place as regards to the software that might be able to put on the dongles for the students to use. Yeah, so as soon as what I'll do is at the end of the webinar, what I'll do is if I can grab the contact details for the person that asked the question, and I'll get back to them once I've got an answer, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's good. Perhaps we'll have that as part of the feedback that we give more broadly, because I think that's a really interesting challenge, and some of the things that we're facing, aren't we? Somebody else mentioned about having access to IT, and I know there are some of our young people in our community that are accessing the bursary, and I wonder if you're having challenges with actually accessing and being able to purchase technology, let alone being able to have the funds to be able to do it. So that will be something we can perhaps pick up later on. Top tips have been absolutely fabulous, and some brilliant resources that are shared, and thank you for your feedback. Somebody mentioned about LSAs supporting at home. It can be challenging because they've got young children themselves, homeschooling, and I know that that's a challenge for all of us. There are some technologies that can support that with blurring backgrounds, but I think that's always a bit tricky, even with cats and dogs and things like that jumping on your lap when you're trying to work as well. We've also talked about some really brilliant platforms that are really quite interactive, so that's been really good to hear. And it was nice to hear that Claire talked about friendship developments through group Google, and Michaela talked about actually her autistic students are now engaged, so great feedback. Anything else that anyone wants to feedback on at this point in the chat? If not, we'll move on.
Can I just pick up on the point about the staff who what we're asking to support students, Elaine?
Absolutely.
I think there's a really clear guideline around boundaries that we're all able to implement when we're in our normal working day or week, and we've republished, or we've redevised and published some guidance today to the staff who are supporting online, very specifically about online support. So all the safeguarding functions for staff and students are still in place, but I wanted to recap. So we've done that. We've had, as you will all have had, we've had some hilarious incidents in staff meetings, let alone when we're working with students. And I think we can only control the part of it that we can control, and we can only support our staff to the best of our abilities, and constantly being mindful of the fact that we're all doing this for a reason, and there's this huge menace across every element of our society at the moment, which is putting us all in a really stressful position. So I think while the practicalities of supporting students is very challenging, we've very deliberately in the inclusion service at the college adopted, I wouldn't say a laissez-faire approach, but our priority is supporting our staff and their family. And I want my staff and I want their families to be happy and healthy, because then when we are able to support our students, we can. But we can't control that other part of it. So if a young person is going to access something inappropriate on the interview through, on the internet through one of our dongles, that's going to happen regardless of our intention. And we've got to kind of give ourselves permission to not control some of those things. And I think we've very deliberately not implemented any process where I'm asking staff to measure or weigh what they're doing in a day or how many people they're supporting. We are using good news comments on our recording system to make sure that we're able to record when students have engaged and been supported. But I'm not expecting my teams to deliver 7.4 hours of support if they're being paid for a 7.4 hour day.
And I think it's a really helpful comments.
Yeah, well, it's just practical ways, I think, of we're already all under stress and everybody's already exhausted through this new way of working, and also constantly trying to read people's faces on a tiny screen. So I think we kind of need to give ourselves permission that everybody's intention is clear and it's supporting students. So
thank you, Sarah, for your comments. That's absolutely fabulous. Let's move on to the next speaker, please.
So hi, it's Jane at Western again. I just wanted to cover what we're doing through my virtual college. This obviously was launched in direct response to the lockdown and having to move very quickly to a virtual college. And we've found a variety of ways of basically supporting remote working, but also reducing anxiety within learners and staff. And I think that's important. There's a few comments in the chat at the moment about supporting staff. We've talked a lot about the students and the support, but actually the staff are just as important in the support that's needed at this time. So there's a few visuals here of ways in which we've been engaging, obviously sharing pictures of successes and different sessions with peers, so they can see what other learners have been up to, and just to keep in contact with them really. We've also had tutors posting updates to students in quite an informal way, which has gone down really well. They've really enjoyed that kind of communication from their tutor, and you can see there's like a happy birthday. That's where a number of students all held up a different letter, and it was collated as a collage to wish one of their fellow pupils a happy birthday. Our principal, Dr. Paul Phillips, has been sending or encouraging staff to share their, successes and their experiences of any virtual delivery and learning and feedback from students and partners. And he's actually been sharing that weekly through my virtual college newsletter to all staff. And that's been a really nice way of celebrating how staff have, really stepped up and changed and been very resilient and dynamic in their approach to both delivering and supporting students, but also staying in contact with their colleagues as well. So my virtual college newsletter has been really well received, and still getting a lot of successes and news and snippets and sound bites and top tips through that. But also as a college, we've invested in kind of the well-being of staff and learners. So we've all had access to Les Mills on a daily basis. There's yoga sessions, there's dance sessions, there's online courses, craft courses, just to help people. So there's been a lot of support wrapped around the delivery as part of my virtual college. I'd like to hand over now to Nicola, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Nicola Lace, and I'm a lecturer and professional learning and development coach at Western College. And the intention of my presentation is to share with you our experience of implementing home learning for an engagement needs provision, as well as to share some top tips which we have found invaluable in doing so. Next slide, please. So learner engagement is something that as practitioners, I think we're naturally used to wanting to see and feel in our classrooms. We naturally want to be able to hear motivation and witness interaction. So therefore, I think the concept of home learning in the first place felt quite alien. And we also had quite a lot of challenging and concerning questions about how we were going to do this. We were really worried about learners, staff and our community feeling isolated. We were worried if our learners would attend or even log in. We were worried about how our learners with no access to any technology would be able to get involved. And we were worried about making sure that we could ensure that our young people, even at a distance, could still access and receive the same amount of support they would if the college was open. Next slide, please. So to give you a little bit of context around the engagement course that I'm talking about, it's called Progress 2, and it's a re-engagement provision which targets to work with some of the hardest to reach young people in the county. Many of these learners will have complex behaviour needs, high anxieties and barriers around education. A lot of them may live in supported housing and be from low-income households. So therefore, moving our face-to-face mentoring and basic skill sessions online felt very challenging. And likewise, in the early stages of COVID and lockdown, or just before lockdown, we were starting to see quite a lot of anxiety and concerns arising from the learners and parents. So some were displaying quite physical symptoms of stress and worry. Others were feeling quite worried about having to stay at home all day and not actually be able to see their friends. There was lots of worries about whether or not they felt they were able to manage their own time and concentrate. And they were worried about next year and what implications that might have. And, you know, with events being cancelled, they didn't really feel like there was much to look forward to. So with this in mind, we began implementing our framework for study. Next slide, please. So it had already been decided that Teams would be the college-wide platform for home learning. And so our first activity was that we needed to RAG rate all of our learners by their current level of engagement and IT accessibility. We knew it was going to be a challenge asking our learners to not only work independently, but to now also do this in what I think a lot of them were considering was now going to be their free time. However, after already spending 6 months engaging these students, we were already at a bit of an advantage, and we did have a strong understanding of what their individual needs were. So in the first place, we looked back at all our initial assessments data and ensured that we had access to the wider college for support. We built in welfare, free lunch allowances and additional support, all in the background, ready to help as normal. We knew that our approach needed to be consistent and it needed to be reliable, and the relationship of trust that we had built over 6 months just couldn't be disrupted. And so to not create any further anxieties for learners, parents or staff, we made the decision to literally move our current timetable exactly as it was online. We looked at the technology barriers as well as the emotional health and well-being of each person, and how this would impact their online presence. We completed an audit finding out who had access to what equipment, and we realised that to limit anxiety and furthermore feelings of frustration at being faced with a new and different situation, that we would need to be ready to problem solve almost immediately to discourage any displays of challenging behaviour. Next slide, please. So let's quickly just have a look through some of the most common problems we faced and some of the solutions. I'm guessing some of you have probably had similar ones and you might recognise some different answers. Solutions. So the first one, I had no access to the internet, so we did have dongles that we were able to send out to learners, but also we did provide an awful lot of resources that were printed on paper, and we managed to send these out in the post or get these delivered to students' houses. I don't like talking on the phone or in a group online. So some young people felt quite anxious about writing and other people seeing it. So we did offer to talk to them outside of the main chat, so direct messaging, and also to be able to post emojis and GIFs to maybe represent their thoughts and feelings instead of extended pieces of text. I can only use a laptop at certain times of the day. So we would make sure that we always pre-recorded our sessions. You know, we needed to be flexible when working with re-engaging learners. We realised that their sleeping patterns might have started to change a little bit, and we'd probably need to respond at different times. In some cases, we actually created a whole individualised timetable for certain young people. My phone doesn't support the file that you sent me. This was quite a common one. So I've just posted up a website link there that's quite useful. So you can upload any sort of file and download or export it in a different way. So for example, if you uploaded a PDF file, you can download it back in Word, and it's free to use. So we found that really useful, so that whatever Android or whatever phone or laptop you had, we could find a format for you to be able to complete the work. How can I get back feedback from paper-based resources? So we looked at sort of doing feedback in different ways through photographs, voice notes. We also left pre-stamped envelopes so they could send the work back to us. I have no access to any equipment. So like I said earlier, we completed an audit and the college were able to loan the majority of laptops out to people who didn't have any. However, as well, in some cases, we actually looked at their wider support network, maybe an auntie or uncle or somebody that like that they were able to borrow a laptop from. And actually, we even had in some cases social workers actually who were able to hunt down laptops for those young people. So differentiating tasks and problem solving around obstacles was a key focus for us. So adapting the scheme of learning to work with what our young people had access to at home was another key factor. With many of our learners living independently without a strong family background, we had to be more creative. So for example, we swapped painting famous art pieces with taking photographs. We used pencils instead of expensive paints. We created craft tasks from materials around the house, and we changed our normal cooking sessions to budget cookery. In the first week of lockdown, we researched activities and daily challenges which had become viral sensations and which we believed would appeal to 16 to 21-year-olds. So, for example, we made cloud coffees, completed the Joe Wicks morning workouts, took part in mindfulness and meditation activities, did various charity fundraisers for the NHS, completed online makeup classes, and perhaps one of the most successful things we did was afternoon Q&A sessions, where we explored things like sexual health, well-being, and COVID. So these are some of our key lessons and top tips, really. So one thing that we found really important was to drop the pressure and learn the mechanics. We found that by spending more time engaging, chatting, talking, increased the likelihood that our learners would say later on attend a 3-hour math session. We also found by doing the small little starter activities, it helped everybody to learn the mechanics of teams. And so therefore it'd pay off a lot later on. Choose one activity at a time. Don't bamboozle learners with multiple tasks at the same time. It's very easy for instructions to get lost in that online chat, and people can be quite, lose their trail of thought or what activities next to do. Check in on learners in a timely manner and remind them of impending deadlines. You should know how long your learners should take to complete a task. So make sure you differentiate for each person, allowed for varied deadlines, and be flexible. One tip we found really useful was sending out the extension tasks privately to learners who had already completed the main task, but we didn't want to discredit the others. So feedback to your learners in a variety of ways. We've moved beyond mundane emails now. We start to use voice notes, video calls, picking up the telephone. Break down communication barriers. One tip we have found to limit parent anxieties and concerns is to contact them personally every fortnight and to invite them into tutorials so they feel a bit more aware and involved with what's happening. Give your learners a reason to get online. Start each lesson with a fun fact, video, or GIF. Make lessons active and build up a feeling of anticipation by making contact with your learners in advance, building up momentum and excitement for the lesson ahead. And finally, and probably the most important one for us, how are you? Show an active interest. We found that simply caring or asking how someone was doing really helped everyone's mental well-being. I think it's really important to remember that everyone's learning in this process. And in fact, some of the highlights and best moments of this for us has been actually when the learners have been teaching us how to do things online, remembering that they were born with the time, I've always had the internet. And so I think if a conversation is all that happens in the day, but both you and the young person are starting to engage with each other, then you're already on the right path. Thanks very much.
Hi, back to Jane at Western. So we've heard a lot about how we've supported learners in terms of their actual learning, but obviously critically at this time, emotional health and well-being is just as important. There's a lot of nervousness about coming back into a college environment. So we've actually been creating a number of how-to guides that have been put on our website. So things like how to make a face mask or a protective visor, so things like that. So just supporting learners and staff to think about that return to work. We've also had the tutors have been kind of messaging students, but in a less formal way as well, which they've really responded well to. So there's kind of, you can see there at the middle of the screen, one of the tutors has put up a morning chat for learners to check in. On the right hand side of the screen, you can see there's a list of different services that we offer to support learners and staff. So things like Young Minds, Samaritans and the welfare team. We've sent out messages, that's a particular example from Easter, but we're sending out messages all the time to remind people that they're not alone, that they are supported, and there's lots of different things that we can do to support them at this time, not just with learning but for their emotional mental health and well-being. And you'll see on the left hand side of the screen there that there's we've had a number of people pre-record sessions for our learners, so again keeping them engaged. They can hear from people in the outside world. It's targeted to specific course content, and we're actually developing a series of those sorts of webinars and recordings to help support learners and make them feel connected to the outside world. Next slide, please. And as I've mentioned, we've got a number of resources that we use as a college to support learners and staff. So the BAM there, the Body and Mind, is a whole series of activities that actually was happening prior to COVID-19 and the virtual college. But what's happening now is a lot of that activity is going virtual. So I mentioned earlier the Les Mills and the yoga sessions, but there's lots of things that is happening as part of that initiative. We've also got Big White Wall that we actually subscribe to as a college, and that's accessible by students and staff. It's a 24-hour, 7 days a week service, 365 days of the year. And basically it's an online portal where you can post your feelings and kind of interact quite informally with other people that are on Big White Wall. So that's across, you know, their network, not just within the college. But actually they sit critically, sitting behind that tool is a number of trained counsellors, and they continually monitor what's on that wall, and if there's any kind of trigger words or phrases used, they will step in and support that individual immediately with any issues they might be facing. So when learners aren't in college, I say virtually in with us and gaining support from tutors, there's that support that's available to them as well. And actually on that portal, there's a number of self-help guides around lots of different subject areas. So things like mental health, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, feeling peer pressure, all sorts of things. So it's a really nice way of people being able to go and sort of at least read around how they're feeling and what support is available to them. And also the directory of useful services, that's a kind of a collaboration of a whole different range of support services and links that we've been sending out to people. So now I will, I think we've got a question slide, haven't we, Elaine, if we want to pause here for any questions on this section of the webinar.
We most certainly have, Jane, and there's been some really great chat that's been taking place. I suppose very early on before we moved into this section, still around staff timetabling and feeling that they've got to work 24/7 because they're working from home rather than switching off. I think it's really important that we have that divide and have an office space or a space where you can be. Sarah's noted that she puts a lanyard on and then takes that off. So that's probably a good idea. For me, it's heels and flip-flops and then my slippers or something like that. I think that's something to consider. There was still lots of talk about lots of different types of platforms. The Big White Wall sounds fabulous. I've not heard of Slack, so I'm going to go and investigate that. And I'm absolutely so inspired by some of the learning and activities that's been shared by a colleague today. That's really inspirational, and thinking about extension tasks and parental tutorial support as well. And I think something for us to explore and to move into next stage is how we look coming back, and how we supporting and engage our learners in that coming back, because we've talked a lot about the mental health and well-being, working from home and learning from home, and it'd be interesting to explore that later. Jane, I noticed you commented on the virtual open days and technologies. I think that's something for us to explore, and how we engage with our learners, and to make sure that we still give all of that great SEND guidance as well. So any other thoughts? Anyone want else to comment before we move on? Let's move on. So it's on to me. I'm going to talk about employer engagement and what's working well. I don't want to cover any of the items that we've looked at before, because there's been amazing things that have already been shared. So this is my area of focus this afternoon for you. I suppose what I want to do is just to reflect not just on our ways of working at the college, but I think what I've heard today here and from all of you, there is a real sense that we are in a new way of working, and it's making us think and work differently, isn't it? And we're all faced with the challenges and responding well to support and engage our SEND learners and our supported interns and our apprentices during this unprecedented time. But we are finding solutions to how to overcome these. Sorry about that. I think for us, and I'm sure you will agree, how amazing our FE sector is responding to our entrepreneurial thought and action, and finding solutions, not actually looking at the problems. And I'm absolutely inspired by the mindset of our staff and how they are interacting with our students. It fills me with absolute pride at how we're responding to this situation. So when I think about our supported interns, I just want to talk about what we're doing at the moment with them. We have our job coaches that are in contact daily and setting employability work. Our supported interns are actually not deterred during this time and are brushing up on their employability skills with help from their job coaches. They're actually taking this time and opportunity to fine-tune their CVs and to practice job searching, which is always a challenge for our young people. So more IT skills that they're learning, and also practicing those interview skills and developing those through online platforms. We also have, and before we had lockdown, 12-week pre-employment projects for our young people on employability pathways and those on supported internships. So we've been really focusing on that whilst the young people have been at home. So we've had pre-employment projects for over 12 weeks for looking at administration, customer services, hospitality and retail. And our supported interns previously have used Dropbox for them to collect and upload their work, and so they've continued with that practice. And I think it's really a poignant note, and I think some of you have noted that it's important to be able to have access to their work, so you can look at that, review it, and give them some good feedback. Later on, if you look at the ETF website, we're running over the summer some supported internship webinars. We're looking at the best practice from the Department for Education as a model, so we'll be exploring that a little bit later. Of course, we're also looking at achievement for our young people like you are as well, and what that actually means for our SEND students, interns and apprentices, and those that need support, and making sure that they keep learning, as well as to give them the latest information on how to gain their results and qualifications that they'll be awarded. To actually help them with their next steps, because it's really important to think about actually what skills they will need so that they can so they can further progress, go into further work, or even when we're looking at university. So we have been working really well with employers during this time. Obviously, a lot of our apprentices have been furloughed, but we still are engaging and keeping in contact with our employers, and they have had the time to be able to feed back to our apprentices and to our supported interns, which has really helped the skills development. And we've been doing that through Zoom, through Blackboard Collaborate, and the employers have been engaged in employer projects and giving feedback. We also have for our assessors and our apprentices that are being supported, trying to keep it as business as usual when we're supporting them remotely, because we're thinking about their upcoming endpoint assessments, and we've realised that we shouldn't have got too bogged down with the challenge of remote working. And we've really taken a how might we approach the situation and look for solutions and focused on ways of working. And actually we found that it isn't as complex as we thought it would be, and it's business as usual with a little bit of twist. I think for us also, and I'm hearing this today over and over, how brilliant our students and how well they are using these platforms and to be able to engage in a different way. So it's the power of communication. And the feedback that I've had is that our supported interns, apprentices with special educational needs, has really helped them to develop their speech and language skills. As well as build confidence in communicating and engaging with people in different ways. So this is absolutely crucial when we're looking at their next steps and really help them with their CVs and finding work. Of course, with employers, we're keeping them warm and making sure that we don't lose touch with them for when we want to pick up our supported interns again and placements and apprenticeships. And so we're making sure that we keep in regular contact with them so we can pick up where we left off. And when we send out this webinar and the presentation, in the notes area, there are some frequently asked questions that I've had created, and they'll be on the Send ETF website. So you'll be able to go to the link, and that's apprentices, send frequently asked questions, and supporting employers as well. So when I'm thinking about our commitment to our supported employment agency, our students, when we were absolutely committed to supporting them remotely while lockdown is in place. Once the restrictions are lifted, and I think for those of you who also have supported interns, you'll be thinking, well, actually, can we help them find work, or are we going to continue with their placements? I think that's something that we're going to explore, to be able to see, can we have placements extensions? And I think that more about that later in future webinars. But for those students that haven't gained employment by the end, we'll look at extending that or refer them to our supported employment agency. And I'm actually offering some webinars on that in the autumn term. It's called Mint. And that's to help young people find sustainable employment, for those that really have barriers to engagement with employment. I think overall, what I've really heard from today, and for us to really think about, is that we are forced to work differently, aren't we, with our staff, learners, interns, apprentices and employers, but we're adapting ourselves really well during this time, and I think it will make us stop the clock and think how we will behave differently. I think there's lots of thoughts on that, but overall our students are developing such brilliant new skills, and as a result from working from home, and I think it will stand them well in the future as they become flexible and working in this new environment. I just also wanted to take this opportunity to explore where we are with the SEND review. You're all aware, I expect, that the SEND reforms are up for a review, and the Department for Education is looking how that they can ensure SEND systems are effective and efficient, and providing the right support for young people with SEND so that they can thrive and are prepared for adulthood. We know that they're looking at these themes and they're all familiar to us. I think there's a little bit of a pause right now because of the current situation, but work is still continuing. When we actually look at the progress they're making, which is quite interesting, that their reflections are actually, what do you think that we might do differently as a result of the pandemic? And is there any learning or best practice emerging from this that we should build on in the SEND review? And I think that might form part of some conversations that we take forward over the coming weeks, and how we build on that. So it'd be really interesting to hear your thoughts and feedback on that. Don't know if there's any thoughts or consideration and any questions from anyone at this stage. Okay, thank you. So coming up next, we have, as Jane noted at the beginning, a focus on employability. You can access all of our webinars that and activities that will be coming up from the link there, from the Excellence Gateway. So please do dip in that on a regular basis to see what's coming up. But perhaps, Weston, you can just talk about what's happening in your area coming soon.
Yeah, so coming soon, we've got our first hot topic webinar on mental health on the 3rd of June. As I'm sure you're all aware, mental health has been increasingly, I think, focused on by both, the FE sector and partners as well as learners, and we've certainly seen a high volume of learners needing additional welfare support. So that was prior to COVID-19. It's something that we've been asked repeatedly to run a webinar on. So the first webinar will be the 3rd of June. As I mentioned earlier, as part of phase 2 of the education, the SEN Centre for Excellence, the Education Training Foundation has asked each of the 3 centres to focus on employability. So a number of our webinars coming up will be looking at that theme, as well as a number of the other people-focused topics we looked at under phase 1. So things like creating an inclusive organisation, a day in the life of SEND, obviously mental health and wellbeing, we will repeat activities around that. So there's lots of things coming up. So yeah, keep an eye on the ETF website where you'll be able to book for different events. Thanks, Elaine.
Lovely. Darby, over to you.
Hiya. We've done a couple of webinars already, and through the feedback and the review work that we've done as a result of those, we've got 3 very deliberately layered webinars that we're planning in June. So one is conducting virtual reviews and virtual support planning. So the reviews are around EHCP progress and any changes that have happened in that in light of the kind of recent changes around teaching and learning. And support planning is for students who are joining the college. So delivery will look very different, and therefore support will need to look very different. So we're going to explore that. We're doing something around specialist advice and guidance, virtual interviewing, specifically around SEND and employability, and that there's an element in there of the reality check and the power of careers advice and guidance, really. And then just planning transition, so virtual transition planning, because for all of us, I think the days of masses of students coming in to visit us at open events is going to be no more for many months to come. So it's to look what that's going to look like. And then, as we've already said, anything else that we can do to develop, we will do, and our offer from last year remains, and it will all be on the ETF website. Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you. So for Norwich, our focus will be on working with employers, and you can see our offer there when we're looking at how we engage effectively with employers and for those learners with special educational needs. So that will be our primary focus over the coming weeks. We will then move into supported interns and how we support employers, as well as our supported employment agency. So please do keep your eye out from all of our areas on the ETF website, which would be great. Thank you, everyone. We're coming to a close now. Just some closing thoughts before we say goodbye. I think there's been a little bit of feed here from Access to Work in the chat. I know the Department for Education is reviewing that because they know that it's absolutely really arduous and not very easy to access at all. So they are aware of that and trying to simplify that. So I look forward to seeing that because I think it's a real challenge. There's, I think, some other comments where people are going to get in touch with themselves around that. We'll be picking that up, so that's great. Thank you. So I would like to say, keep your eye out on activities from the Centre of Excellence. As Jane said earlier on, we'll send out the slides to you. There will be this recording on on the ETF website, so you'll be able to play it back at any point if you wanted to pick that up. And we'll pull together a briefing paper for some of the Chatham results that have actually come out today and look at key themes. But also do get in contact with us through any of the emails that you can see there on the screen. I'd like to say thanks very much, bye for now, and keep very safe.